Every child deserves a safe home, caregivers that look after them. This is every child's birthright, and there are no exceptions. Unfortunately, a huge number of children grew up in environments that are not safe. And growing up in these environments, these children feel like they're living in a war zone, and their nervous systems are always triggered. When these children grow up, because that trauma and that traumatic environment where they lived in lasted for years, it becomes very hard for them as adults to understand that things have changed and they are no longer dependent on caregivers that were abusive to them, that abused them emotionally, physically, and sexually. That is the legacy of childhood trauma that every individual live with. Trauma was not your fault, especially when you're a kid. It was the fault of the caregivers, the environment they provided you. You can blame it on fate if you are looking for some journal idea, because traumatic environments don't just have these abusive caregivers. Sometimes the environment itself where you're living in, the neighborhood, the school you go to, you find safety nowhere. Welcome, listeners. I'm your host, Hamza, and welcome to the first episode of Living with Childhood Trauma. In this episode today, I wanted to talk about managing triggers. A trigger is anything that happened in your environment that transport you back in time or reminded you of somebody from your childhood that traumatized you. Like for me, if somebody shout at me, it reminds me of my uncle who would shout at me and sometimes even beat me up when he's extremely angry. And to a child, an adult appeared like huge. And as an adult, when these people start shouting, they appear the same. So it becomes difficult to understand where I am in point in time. Is it the room in a small suburb in Karachi, or is it the busy street of Melbourne outside a cafeteria? Am I a 14-year-old kid or a mid 30 adult? Deal with this. From my study, what I found most effective was uh, Janina Fisher, her book Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivor. I highly recommend my listeners to have a look at this book. In her book, she described a concept that if you if I look at how I usually or even all of I hope you all relate as well, that when we talk we often say things like a part of me wanted me to buy that new car, but another part of me is warning me that, you know what, you have a lot of other debt obligations. Part of me wanted to take risks, but then another part of me feels that it's not a good idea. So we often see ourselves talking to ourselves, and that is what she called fragmentation. And in case of trauma survivors, they they are far more fragmented because what was happening when they were growing up was there there are parts of them that stood up and took the hit, and there were other parts that were protected. Another important thing to understand here is that this idea that we are not there is not one self, but we have we are we have multiple selves or multiple subpersonalities is not something new. Freud described this idea. Psychoanalysis have id, id, ego. You can read about it, and I am if you are into psychology, I'm sure you are familiar with this. So this idea that we just one self, but there are multiple parts of us is not new. What Janina Fisher says is that growing when we when a child grew up as an adult, there is always a part of the child that stays the same age. So when you grow when you're a toddler and you grew a bit and then you become a preteen, there is still a toddler part of you that remains with you. So you can see them as snapshots of yourself. And that is why often you feel that, you know what, That was childish. You often say that, I behaved like that was childish of me. That was childish of me. Shows is often a child part acting out. And as an adult, when you look back at that and you're like, oh, you know what? That was very childish or immature of me. So that is that is my reading of the concept of parts she introduced. So we have these parts that are basically snapshots. Now, what happened when we had this experience of being transported back in time? That is what Janina Fisher called blending. This person shouting at me triggers the child part who experience his uncle shouting at him all the time. And bam, I'm back in time. That part took over me. And my body reaction are same as the child I was at the time. And suddenly this individual feel empowered. Look how easily I have taken control of this person. Now, what are we going to do in this situation? Janina Fisher suggests that we unblend. And she described in her book a five-part process of doing that. The first step is assume that the overwhelming feelings and emotions that you're feeling, they are not your adult self emotions and feeling. They're coming from a child part. No matter how much it feels like it's you need to keep reminding yourself that this is not me, this is the child part that got triggered. And this is how the child part is communicating. It is very important that to understand that child part not always communicate to you with words. You don't have the thought that or images like you can see your uncle very clearly, and or this person looks like your uncle now suddenly. Sometimes there are body sensations as well. So you feel like the way you used to feel at that time when you were a kid. You feel it in your forehead, you feel numbness in your chest, you feel like your heart is sinking. These physical uh, sensations are also a way that child parts communicate. And when Janina Fisher says blend, that means that the child part has taken over and you control and yourself is no longer in control. It is more like you can imagine it more like being possessed by a genie, and that genie is your child part. And that part is in complete control of your emotions, your the body sensations you're feeling in your body, even your thoughts. That is why it feels like you were transported back in time. Then, in order to counter it, the first step to unblind is no matter what you feel or feeling, you need to keep reminding, or no matter what thoughts you have in your mind, Need to keep reminding of yourself that this is not me, this is my child part. The second step is to describe it, your feelings, thoughts, and the reaction you're having in your body as the child part's reaction. Like for me, I would say little Hamza is scared. Little Hamza thinks that he's going to get badly beaten up and he can't do anything about it. He thinks that he is in Karachi right now, not in Melbourne. And this is not some random stranger, but his uncle. Once you do that, the third step is you need to create some separation from them. Now, the way to do it is change your posture. Okay, take a deep breath, stand erect, lengthen your spine, and keep repeating that they are feeling anger, they are feeling overwhelmed, they are feeling paranoid. Little Hamza is scared, little Hamza is angry, little Hamza is feeling helpless because he's having both these emotions at the same time. And the angry little Hamza wanted to hit this uncle, but the scared little Hamza feel that this uncle will throw him out of his home and he would not be able to complete his studies. Fourth step. In fourth step, once you have established this much separation, now you need to bring in your grown up mind part. And the way to do it is to imagine that this is your friend. Little Hamza is a child, or I would say, better yet, instead of assuming it to be your friend, assume this is a child that is scared. How are you going to calm the kid down? Because when you assume that you're dealing with a child, the language you use is very different from when you are calming down an adult. And here, I would suggest that deal with this child like you deal with very scared children. And the best resources are for that is looking at videos. There are a lot of videos on YouTube about how to calm a child when they're having a tantrum. And the way to do it that first you make physical contact with the kid before you say anything verbally. So in order to make physical contact with the part, you can always hug yourself, touch where you're feeling in your body the sensations of anger, fear. Touch that part of your body. When you do that, that is basically you making physical contact with the part. Or embrace yourself with both of your hands. That is a way to indicate to the child part that you're hugging the kid. And now, when you're there, the first thing you do is now we are talking about we are on the fourth step, and you have established physical contact with the child. Once you do that and you give him some comfort, deal with the threat immediately. Either you can always walk away from that situation because when the child part get triggered, the part froze. Or you can say something back like "fuck off," "who the fuck are you," or something like that. Say that so that you by doing that you're basically indicating to the child part that you know what, the adult is here and this person can no longer hurt you. So you need to remove the child part from that situation, and it depends on situation. It changes from situation to situations. Sometimes all you need to do is just walk away. Other times you need to tell the other person back off in whatever way you feel fit in that situation. And once that is done, go back to the child. So what you have done is you have removed the threat that the child was scared of, and now the child got the message that the adult is here, they are in control. And once that is done, you have now you go back to the child just like you do in an actual situation where if you're on the street and you see this adult shouting at a kid, the first thing you will do is you will grab the kid, then you deal with that adult. How dare you say that to this little kid, this or that, or whatever is the appropriate way to deal in that to deal with that adult in that situation. You remove remove the child from the threat, and the third, now you're stabilizing the kid. You need to reassure, and the way to do it is always make the physical contact with your child part first before you deal with the adult, because till you make physical contact with your child parts, be it your touching your body in areas where you feel the sensation of being overwhelmed. Are you feeling it in your forehead? Are you feeling it in your chest? In your, if your heart is feel like the heart is sinking, you can always place your hand on your heart. Then once you do that, you indicate it to the child that now the adult is here. Then you immediately deal with the threat. Once the child is out of threat, now you go back to the child. Now ask the kid, what do you need from me? And notice is not necessarily the child will you will hear a verbal thought in your head that this is what the child wants. Sometimes it is just a sensation and you feel like the child just wanted to be hugged or held, so you do that. And the way to do it is that always you can put your place both of your hands on your shoulders. This gives the child a sensation that you're hugging the kid, and you can close your eyes, and you can give yourself a gentle press so that the child feel that you're hugging them physically, and see how long they wanted you to hold them. You can hold them as long as till you feel that the child is calm. Now the fifth step is that once the child has calmed down, you ask this child part feedback. Is what you're doing helping them a little? Do they feel less alone now?
I don't know that.
What they what they Alexa just jumped in for no reason. um, do they like what you're doing? Promise the kid that you will check on them and keep your promise. Check on the child part when your day-to-day life, mm, when you're not triggered, when you are just calm. Just imagine the same kid you met in that triggering situation. Check on them, see if they are all right. So these are the 5 steps to unblend. I'll go through them briefly now. The first step is whenever you find yourself in an overwhelming situation, always assume that the feeling you're feeling are coming from the child part. They are not the adult feeling. The next second step is you describe those feelings and thought as the child's reaction to the situation. They are very upset, they are angry, they're scared. Third step is now you create more separation from the child part, and the way to do it is you you stand you stand up, erect your spine, open your chest a bit, take a deep breath. This way you engage your core, and keep repeating that the child is scared, the child is upset, the child is angry. Fourth step is now you decide to talk to the kid. Now, in the fourth step, you will see this child part. You will treat this child part as a child that is overwhelmed, is having a tantrum. And the first step to do it, I would say the first sub step is you make some contact with the kid, and it doesn't necessarily need to be physical contact. So you can let the kid know that you are here, an adult is here. And then another if you feel like the kid physical contact will help, you can always touch the part of your body where you're feeling the sensations of the child part more strongly. Like for me, I feel it in my forehead, so I always touch my forehead with my hand. And if you feel like your heart is sinking, you can always place your hand on your heart. If you feel, you can always uh, rub your shoulders, you can always rub your thighs. Make the physical contact, that making physical contact this way indicate to the child that an adult is here and they're trying to soothe their body. Then you remove the child from, if the child is still in a threatening situation, you remove the child from that situation, take by taking action just like an adult you would do. You would grab the child and you would say fuck off if somebody is threatening them. If you are in that situation, you can do the same thing. Now you have taken control of the child part. Now you're going to deal with that adult that is threatening the child. You can remove yourself from that situation, you can always walk away, or you can just say leave me alone. So whatever way in that situation is appropriate to you deal with that situation. Once that is done, and you are with the child and you have started, now you start uh, going on further. You acknowledge the child that I understand you're very upset, this is a very scary situation, and uh, and I understand your your feelings and emotion. And this is very important that you verbalize to them to this child part what is happening, just like you would verbalize to a child that is having a tantrum. And you do that after you make physical contact, after you calm them down, calm their body down to a point where the thinking brains kick in. Once they're calmed down further, you can start giving them more feedback. You can always tell the kid that you always, the adult you is always here. They don't have to deal with these situations themselves. All they they can just hide behind you and let the adult you deal with these threats in the future. The fifth step is you get their feedback. Does this help? What the way you deal with the situation? And what else they want you to do? If it doesn't help, why it doesn't help? Listen to them. There are ways your parts tells you if they like something, you can feel it in your body, you can feel a sense of relaxation, you feel like smiling. That says that they appreciate, they like how you deal with it. If you feel a sense of resentment, sort of, if you feel like they're holding back, that means that they wanted you to deal with it in a different way. Then you can ask them. Sometimes they do work. Sometimes you get thoughts in your mind that tells you exactly what didn't work out. Sometimes because these child parts suffer huge trauma during their childhood, they often don't trust adults and they feel like this is going to be another disappointment. So, in case you're not hearing anything, or in case you feel like the part is being unreasonable as children, and then you can always listen to them as an empathetic adult, as somebody who doesn't have an ego, and then make a decision based on, like, if a child part is saying, I would have dealt with it myself, that shows that a child can't deal with adult situation. And you need to imagine, can an 8-year-old deal with this work situation where something is not working the way it should? If it's if you're a software developer, it's a technical challenge. Can an 8-year-old deal with it on its own? Of course not. So that is how you would know that are they being reasonable or not. And lastly, keep repeating. It's very important that you keep repeating, and that is how your parts can you will get better at it. So you will have a lot of failures, and it is perfectly fine. You will feel that these kids are still disappointed. Now you need to imagine a child growing up in an environment where for years nobody cared about them. So it is going to take a lot of time for a child to develop that trust and even sometimes to appreciate what you're doing. So, in this episode, what we talked about triggers, the situations that transport us back in time, and where we feel like our reaction is too much. Like I gave an example from my own life. Some random strangers started shouting at me at on the street of Melbourne, and suddenly I'm transported back to Pakistan in that house in the suburb facing my uncle. And then we talked about how to deal with this situation, understanding that it is basically a child part that has taken over us. And now we need to unblend from the child and the five-step process that I described here. I hope you will find this informative. Do give me feedback, and I'm happy to hear your thoughts. Have a good night.